My name is Claire Dawson, and I'm 35 years old. I haven't seen my sister in 6 years. Not since she took the man I was supposed to marry. And yet, this morning, I found myself standing in a small funeral home just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, staring at the entrance like it held a ghost I wasn't ready to face. The room smelled of lilies and wood polish. Too clean for what today meant. My mother's name was etched on the memorial card I clutched, already damp from the sweat on my hands. He hadn't cried. Not yet. But my whole body felt like it was bracing for a storm I knew would hit. The moment that door opened, next to me stood my father. His shoulders slightly hunched, his hands too still. He hadn't said much since I arrived. But I knew he was thinking what I was thinking. That she would come. That he might have to look her in the eyes again. That maybe we both would. I used to think I was over it. I had moved away. Changed cities. Jobs. My entire life. But pain like that doesn't dissolve. It just quiets itself until something wakes it up again. Today, that something was a name printed in delicate cursive on the guest list taped to the chapel door. Samantha Dawson. She was coming. And so was Jake. I didn't know what I'd say. Or if I'd say anything at all. But I knew one thing the moment I stepped through those doors. I wasn't the same woman they left behind. I had come back not to fight, but to stand still in my truth. Even if my voice shook in silence. 6 years ago, my life looked exactly like the version people dream about. I was 30, living in Asheville, North Carolina, and working as a regional communications director for a natural food company. My apartment was 2 blocks from a lake. My mornings started with good coffee, and my nights ended with soft jazz playing while I cooked something simple and warm. Jake and I had been together for almost a year and a half when he proposed. It wasn't flashy. Just a quiet picnic on a hillside we used to hike. With string lights in mason jars and a ring tucked into a folded linen napkin. I said yes before he could finish asking. Because in that moment, I thought I had found the kind of love that didn't break. Jake was gentle in a quiet way. He listened more than he spoke. Read biographies for fun. And somehow always remembered the names of my coworkers and the random things I liked to eat when I was stressed. He didn't make grand gestures. But he made me feel safe. Like my life had finally found its rhythm. Planning the wedding was supposed to be the easy part. I didn't want anything big. Just something honest. 100 guests. A converted barn venue with warm lights and acoustic music. Nothing overdone. My mom cried when I asked her to help with the cake design. And my dad spent an entire afternoon helping Jake sand down old wooden signs we were going to use for table numbers. Samantha wasn't supposed to be part of any of it. We weren't close growing up. She was the wild one. The younger sister who wore eyeliner in 8th grade and left town for college without ever looking back. I was the responsible one. The one who stayed close, visited every few months, called home on Sundays. But that spring, my mom said maybe the wedding could be a bridge. Maybe. Just maybe. This could be the thing that brought us together. I didn't disagree. I asked Samantha to be my maid of honor. Not because I trusted her, but because I wanted to try. She sounded surprised when I called. But she said yes quickly. Too quickly. And something in her voice felt unreadable. At first, she was helpful in all the right ways. She sent me dress ideas. Coordinated flower vendors when I got too busy. Even offered to handle small errands without me asking. My mom was thrilled. Said she hadn't seen us so connected in years. And for a while, I let myself believe it was all real. The shift came quietly. Jake started missing dinner. He used to be the one suggesting restaurants and making reservations 2 weeks ahead. Now he was buried in work. Or too tired. Or had back-to-back meetings. The way he looked at me changed too. It wasn't unkind. It was just distant. Like he was there. But not really with me. I remember one night, sitting across from him in a small Italian place we used to love, I was telling him a story about a client mishap, something that would have made him laugh before. But he just nodded, barely glanced up from his phone. I laughed anyway. Alone. Just to fill the space. When I asked him if everything was okay, he brushed it off. Said he was just stressed. Tired from work. I told myself that made sense. We were planning a wedding. Juggling family. Deadlines. Budgets. Everyone gets overwhelmed. But my gut didn't believe him. Around that time, Samantha's involvement grew. She wasn't just helping anymore. She was there. Always there. Showing up at fittings without being asked. Texting Jake with ideas for the rehearsal dinner. Asking me for his schedule so she could surprise him with a vendor update. One day, I got a text from her that said she and Jake had gone over the cake design again and sent me the new draft. I froze when I read it. I didn't remember asking her to meet him. I didn't remember any meeting being scheduled. I called Jake right away. And he answered on the second ring, calm as ever. Said Samantha had just dropped by his office with some swatches and they talked for a minute. It didn't mean anything. And yet, it did. Something in his tone felt too polished. Like it had been practiced. I didn't accuse him. I didn't say what I was really thinking. I just said okay. And hung up. Then stood in my kitchen staring at the tile floor. Wondering how something that once felt so certain could now feel so fragile. I started noticing other things. A pause in his voice when he said my name. The way he put his phone face down when we were together. How he'd mentioned Samantha in passing. Little things, like her ideas for centerpieces. As if she had somehow become a part of every detail of our wedding. One night, I found him scrolling through her Instagram. Quickly switching apps when he saw me walk into the room. He smiled, like nothing happened. I smiled back. But something inside me cracked just a little more. I didn't know then that everything would break. I still thought I could fix it. I still thought if I worked harder, stayed calm, smiled more, held it together, he would come back to me. That we would be okay. Because love doesn't just vanish. People don't just forget. Sisters, don't betray sisters. At least that's what I believed. And believing that was my first mistake. It started with something small. I was cleaning out Jake's car on a warm Saturday morning. Tossing out old receipts and coffee cups. Just trying to be helpful before our weekend trip. The sun was hitting the dashboard in a way that made the dust sparkle. And for a moment, everything felt normal. Then I reached under the passenger seat, and my fingers closed around something cold. I pulled it out slowly, and stared at it in my hand. A thin silver bracelet with a lavender gemstone in the center. The same kind Samantha used to wear in high school. The one she said brought her calm during anxiety spells. I sat in the driver's seat holding it. My stomach tightening. Maybe it wasn't hers. Maybe it belonged to someone else. I told myself that once, twice, 100 times in the silence of that car. But my hands had already started to shake. I walked back into the apartment and waited until Jake came out of the shower. I didn't throw it at him or ask him what he was doing. I just held it up and asked whose it was. He glanced at it, barely flinched, and said it was probably Samantha's. She'd gotten a ride with him to meet a florist since her car was in the shop. The explanation was smooth. Too smooth. The kind that slides into your ear before your mind can reject it. I nodded. Said nothing. Placed the bracelet on the counter. And walked away like it didn't matter. But it did. I couldn't stop picturing her wrist wearing it. Resting on the console between them. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept trying to remember how many times she had been around him when I wasn't. The flower appointments. The cake tastings. The errands she volunteered for. Moments I hadn't thought twice about. I scrolled through her social media. Looking for nothing, and finding too much. A blurry story from 2 weeks earlier at a boutique flower shop. She had posted a mirror shot with the caption, "Something sweet is blooming." I hadn't paid attention to the reflection before. But now I noticed the outline of a man in the background. Tall. Dark hair. Same build as Jake, I closed the app and put the phone face down on the bed. My chest felt tight. Not like heartbreak, but like suffocation. I told myself I needed proof. That I couldn't accuse anyone without knowing for sure. That maybe it really was innocent. But the bracelet still sat on the kitchen counter. And I knew it wasn't just a piece of jewelry. My gut had already decided. Even if my mouth couldn't say it yet. And deep down, I knew. Something was breaking. And it wasn't going to fix itself. I didn't plan it. That morning, I woke up early and decided to bring Jake breakfast. Something simple. Just 2 egg sandwiches and coffee from the little place he liked by the corner. It was a small gesture. And the kind I used to do before we got too busy planning a wedding to remember how to care in quiet ways. I remember standing in line, thinking maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe I had let my fear get louder than the truth. The sun was just coming up. And for a second, it felt like maybe we still had a chance. His office building was all glass and clean lines. Too perfect. Too still. The receptionist greeted me like usual, and said Jake was in a meeting. I told her I'd just drop it off quickly. That I wouldn't interrupt. I think she wanted to stop me. But I was already walking. The hallway felt longer than I remembered. My fingers tightened around the paper bag as I reached his door. I didn't even knock. I looked through the frosted glass and saw 2 shadows. Close. Too close. One was Jake. The other had her hair tied up in a loose bun and wore a lavender dress. Samantha. My body moved before I could think. I opened the door and stepped inside. They turned in unison. Like a bad scene from a movie. His hand was still on her waist. Her hand was still resting lightly on his chest. Neither one moved fast enough. I set the bag on the chair beside me. My voice came out calm. Too calm. I told them not to stop on my account. Jake stepped back. Straightened his shirt. Reached for words that didn't come fast enough. Samantha looked at the floor like it could protect her from the truth. I asked them how long. Her voice cracked when she said, since after the engagement party. I let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. But something sharp and hollow. I told her I already knew. I just wanted to hear it out loud. Jake tried to explain. Said it wasn't what I thought. That they never meant for it to happen. I told him not to insult me with tired lines. I asked if either of them had stopped to think that I was the only one left in the dark. That my life had become someone else's secret. Neither of them answered. I reached for my ring and slipped it off. My hand didn't shake. I placed it on the edge of Jake's desk like it meant nothing. Even though I had once cried when he gave it to me, I looked at Samantha. I told her she had made her choice. Then I turned to him and said, mine. She chose you. And I choose myself. Samantha turned and left first. Jake stood there. Mouth half open. Eyes unfocused. I didn't wait for another word. I walked out with nothing in my hands but a silent heart that had already started to close. The hardest part wasn't seeing it. It was realizing that somewhere inside me, I had known all along. And I stayed anyway. Until I couldn't anymore. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. Not my friends. Not my coworkers. Not even my father. I packed 2 suitcases. Booked a one-way flight to Minneapolis. And left Asheville on a cloudy Tuesday without looking back. There was no dramatic goodbye. No final confrontation. I just knew that if I stayed another day in that apartment, surrounded by photos and half-unpacked wedding gifts, I would drown in my own silence. So I walked away from everything that once made sense. Minneapolis was cold. Still snow on the sidewalks in late March. The kind that clings to corners and slows your steps. I rented a small studio on the 3rd floor of a brick building with thin walls and a noisy radiator. It wasn't much. But it was mine. The mornings were the hardest. I would wake up before the sun, forgetting where I was for a few seconds, expecting to see Jake next to me. Then reality would return like a quiet slap. I would sit at the edge of the bed, breathing through the weight in my chest, and then get up anyway. I made my own coffee every morning. Nothing fancy. Just a drip pot and oat milk. But it became a ritual. Something grounding. The scent filled the kitchen before I even opened the blinds. As if it knew I needed to feel human again, I started cooking simple meals. Soup. Rice. Roasted vegetables. I wasn't eating much. But I made the effort. It felt like reclaiming something small, each time I plated food and sat down alone at the table. No longer waiting for someone to ask how my day had been. The job was quiet. 2. A new branch of the parent company I had once worked for in Asheville. I worked in internal communications again. But the pace was slower. Less demanding. I answered emails. Drafted memos. Joined video calls, where no one knew my name beyond the signature on the screen. I liked it that way. No one asked about my fiancé. Or my family. Or why I flinched every time my phone buzzed. I was invisible. And for a while, that felt safe. On weekends, I walked around BDE Makaska Lake with a paper cup in hand and a scarf pulled tight around my face. I'd watch the frozen water melt into movement. Like my grief was doing the same. Slowly. Almost without permission. I bought a secondhand bookshelf and started reading again. Memoirs? Poetry? Cookbooks? Anything that reminded me life was still full of stories that didn't end in betrayal. I wasn't trying to be happy. I was just trying to survive without bitterness. I downloaded a meditation app. The kind I used to laugh at. Every night. I'd lie on my back. Eyes closed. Listening to soft voices. Tell me to let go. I didn't always believe it. But I listened anyway. That felt like progress. I wrote long emails to my mother but never sent them. I filled notebooks with thoughts I was too ashamed to say out loud. Sometimes I cried while writing. Sometimes I didn't feel anything at all. I missed her. I missed who I was when she was still alive. Before everything unraveled. Before love became something I had to run from. But little by little, the ache softened. Not because I forgot, but because I stopped letting it define me. I wasn't the woman who'd been left at the altar anymore. I was just Claire. A woman who woke up every day, made her own coffee, and kept moving. And that was enough. For now, it was enough. I met Ethan on a Wednesday afternoon at a sustainability workshop my company hosted. I hadn't planned on going, but my manager insisted. And I didn't have the energy to argue. I found a seat near the back, hoping to disappear into the rows of unfamiliar faces. During the break, I stood by the coffee table with a plastic cup of tea, flipping through my phone to avoid conversation. That's when he walked up, holding a sandwich in one hand and an extra in the other. He said he noticed I skipped lunch and offered the extra. Said he hated to see good sandwiches go to waste. He hesitated, then took it. More surprised by my own willingness to engage than by his kindness. We sat near the window and started talking. Nothing deep. Just books. Podcasts. Strange marketing trends we both found hilarious. His voice was calm. His posture open. Like someone who didn't need to impress anyone to be worth something. I learned he worked in investment strategy for community development. And that he once spent a year traveling by train just to write stories about small towns. When I asked why, he said he liked paying attention to things other people rushed past. That stayed with me. There was no flirting. No performance. He never asked about my past or offered compliments. I didn't ask for. He just made space for me to speak. Or not speak. Without making it feel awkward. I hadn't realized how rare that was. When the workshop ended, he walked with me to the elevator. Hands in his pockets. Not in a hurry. He said it was nice meeting someone who listened without checking their phone. I smiled. And for the first time in months, it felt real. We didn't make plans. He didn't ask for my number that day. But I knew, somehow, I would see him again. And I didn't feel afraid. Just steady. Like I had stepped into something small and quiet that might one day matter. It was late on a Saturday evening when I finally told Ethan everything. We were sitting on the balcony of my apartment, wrapped in blankets. The air just cold enough to keep us close. The city below was quiet, and the light from the living room spilled out in soft gold. I didn't plan to tell him, but something about the silence, the way he looked out at the sky instead of at me, gave me the space I needed. I started slowly, almost like I was reading someone else's story. I told him about Jake, about the ring, the cake tastings, the guest lists, about the bracelet in the car and the way Samantha looked at me like I was just in her way. I told him how it felt to be the last to know, how my voice didn't shake when I caught them, how I walked out and didn't look back. Ethan didn't speak. He didn't flinch or interrupt. He just listened, his hands resting quietly between us. And when I finished, when the last word felt like a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, he turned to me and gently reached for my hand. He said he once trusted someone with his business, someone he called family, and lost nearly everything. He didn't compare it. He didn't try to fix it. He just said betrayal doesn't choose favorites. It breaks you, then dares you to keep going. I nodded. Not because I agreed with every word, but because I believed he understood, not with pity, but with recognition, and that made all the difference. In that moment, I didn't feel broken. I felt seen. Not for my story or my scars, but for still being here, still open, still hoping. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. We got married on a quiet afternoon in late spring. The ceremony was held in a small garden behind a cafe we both loved. The kind of place that smelled like fresh bread and warm wood. There were no floral arches or dramatic entrances. Just folding chairs, fairy lights, and people who knew us without needing to ask too many questions. My dress was simple. A soft ivory slip with lace at the sleeves. Nothing borrowed. Nothing blue. Ethan wore a gray jacket he already owned and a pair of brown shoes scuffed at the toes. But his smile was new. And it was enough. We had just over 20 guests. A few coworkers. Old friends from Asheville and Minneapolis. And my mother's best friend who cried before I even walked down the aisle. My father couldn't travel, but he called that morning and told me to live like I deserved the love I had finally found. I held that call in my heart all day. The music was an acoustic version of a song we both loved. The one that played on our first walk home in the snow. Ethan waited under a willow tree with his hands folded and eyes steady, like he had all the time in the world. When I reached him, he whispered that I looked like peace. We wrote our own vows. Mine were about small things. How he always let me choose the side of the bed. How he remembered I hated cinnamon in my oatmeal. How he never once asked me to be anything but exactly who I was. His were about presence. About showing up on days when I wanted to disappear. About holding space even when I didn't fill it. There were no speeches. Just clinking glasses. Soft laughter. And stories told over slices of lemon cake. My old friend Beth played guitar while the sun dipped low behind the trees. And in that golden light, nothing felt missing. I remember looking around and realizing there was no audience. Just witnesses. People who had seen us grow into this. Not chase it like a performance. That felt like the most honest part. After the sunset, we danced on the patio in our bare feet, with string lights above and leaves brushing the ground. I wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. I wasn't comparing it to what almost was. I was just there. Present. Holding Ethan's hand, as if it had always been mine to keep. It didn't feel like starting over. It felt like continuing something I had once forgotten I deserved. The kind of love that doesn't rush. Doesn't raise its voice. Doesn't ask for a spotlight. It just stays. And finally, I did too. The day I returned to Charlotte for my mother's funeral, the air was thick with cold and quiet. The church smelled of polished wood and faint candles. But there was something heavier beneath it all. Like the weight of things unsaid. As I walked through the heavy doors, I could feel the eyes turning toward me. the whispers folding around me like a shadow. Samantha arrived not long after, dressed in a sleek black dress that seemed made for a gala, not a funeral. Her makeup was flawless. Lips painted a bold red. Hair curled in perfect waves. She walked with a confidence that felt out of place in a room meant for mourning, holding Jake's hand loosely, his eyes flickering toward me before quickly looking away. I didn't meet her gaze. I didn't need to. Instead, I turned to my father and said quietly that I would sit in the front row with him. I added that anyone who wanted to perform righteousness could do it from the back. There was no anger in my voice, only calm and steel. Walking down the aisle beside my father, I felt the weight of every step, but also the strength beneath it. No words were exchanged between Samantha and me. No bitter glances or shouted accusations. Just two women occupying the same space. Worlds apart? The service began with soft hymns and stories of my mother's gentle nature, the way she had loved fiercely without demanding perfection. Sitting there, I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Around me, familiar faces blurred into the background as I focused on the light filtering through stained glass. On the steady hand of my father, resting lightly on mine, the tension in the room was like a held breath waiting for release. But I wasn't the one who would exhale first. I had come back not to reclaim what was lost or to fight old battles. I had come back to show up, to be present, and to stand tall in my own truth. And sometimes, that was the loudest victory of all. Ethan's presence was quiet but unmistakable as he stood beside me in that crowded room. He had arrived just before the service began, his calm demeanor like an unspoken shield. No need for grand gestures or loud declarations. His very being shifted the atmosphere. Later, in a private conversation, Ethan revealed something I had never expected. Years ago, he was the one who led the investment group that pulled funding from Jake's startup. The deal that could have changed everything for Jake vanished because of decisions Ethan made quietly behind closed doors. I didn't say a word in response. I simply stood a little taller, feeling the weight of truth settle between us. The looks exchanged around the room shifted. Samantha's confident mask cracked ever so slightly, her eyes darting like a cornered animal searching for an escape. Jake's gaze found mine for a brief moment, but he quickly looked away. There was no anger, no confrontation, just the undeniable knowledge that the game had changed. That power had quietly slipped through his fingers. It wasn't revenge with fire and fury. It was a quiet, elegant turning of tides. Standing there with Ethan, I felt the satisfaction of justice without bitterness. We didn't need to shout to be heard. The room felt heavier, yet somehow lighter, like a storm had passed, leaving clarity in its wake. And in that stillness, I knew the real victory was mine. The knock came late in the afternoon, soft but steady. I opened the door to find Samantha standing there without makeup, wearing an old gray sweater and faded jeans. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight of the last few years had folded her into someone new. Someone Keter. She stepped inside without a word. The familiar creak of the hardwood floors under her feet echoing the past we both tried to forget. I motioned toward the kitchen where the sunlight streamed through the window, dust particles dancing in the warmth. We sat down at the worn table we once shared as kids, the one with chipped edges and faint scratches from years of spilled secrets. Without needing to ask, I poured 2 cups of tea, just like she liked it when we were little. No sugar, no milk, just a thin slice of lemon floating on the surface. Samantha wrapped her hands around the warm cup, taking a slow sip before finally speaking. She said life with Jake was nothing like the story she once dreamed of. It was a gilded cage, a quiet prison filled with lies and regrets. There was no excuse for what she did, no justification for the pain she caused. She wasn't asking for forgiveness or even understanding. She just wanted me to know she carried the weight of her choices every day. The kitchen was silent except for the soft clink of the teacups. I didn't offer comfort or harsh words. Instead, I simply listened, letting the quiet between us speak louder than anything else could. For the first time in years, the space felt honest, free from pretense or old wounds flaring up. Samantha looked up then, eyes red and tired, and said she read every letter I wrote to Mom, every card I sent, even the ones I never mailed. She said those moments showed her there was still kindness left somewhere between us. I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle gently over us like the afternoon light. No words of forgiveness passed between us. Not yet, but in the way we shared that simple tea, something shifted, a silent understanding that maybe, just maybe, healing doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes it's just about showing up, about being seen, and about letting the past live quietly behind us. And so we sat, two sisters in a kitchen full of memories and unspoken hopes, sipping tea and letting the years between us soften just a little more. It was a quiet morning when I realized my period was late. At first, I told myself not to overthink it. But as the days passed, the hope I tried to ignore grew stubborn. When I finally took the test and saw the 2 pink lines, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from a disbelief that felt like a fragile kind of joy. Ethan was the first to notice the change in me. He didn't push for answers, just held my hand and smiled with a tenderness that made the world seem softer. When I told him, his eyes brightened in a way that made my heart ache with happiness I hadn't thought possible. That evening, I called my father on video. His voice cracked as he told me how proud my mother would be. He said she always wanted me to find true happiness, to build a life full of love and light. I held the phone close, tears slipping silently as I watched his face. Later, I shared the news with Samantha during one of our tentative conversations. There was no awkwardness. No old wounds reopened. Just 2 women who once hurt each other, now learning to be kind in different ways. She laughed softly, a sound free of bitterness, and said she never thought she'd see me like this, a mother. We don't talk about the past anymore, not in the way that weighs heavy. Instead, we share small moments, a photo of a growing belly, a recipe for a dinner that's easy to make, a question about how to soothe morning sickness. It feels like building a new language together, one stitched with patience and hope. I know the road ahead won't always be gentle. There will be challenges I can't yet imagine, and moments when fear will whisper too loudly. But for the first time in a long time, I feel ready to face them, not because I am unbroken, but because I am whole enough to keep moving forward. This is a new beginning, not just for me, but for all the pieces of my story that once felt shattered. It's proof that healing doesn't erase the past, it transforms it. And in that transformation, life blooms again. In the quiet corner of the nursery, I hung a small wooden plaque that reads, "Where Healing Begins." Life blooms. It's not just a decoration, but a daily reminder that growth doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes it starts with a single, gentle breath. Looking back, I realize I never needed to fight for victory or prove anything to anyone. The hardest battles were fought within me, the choice not to hold on to anger, the decision to live honestly and without regret. That's where real strength lives. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I do know this healing is not a destination, but a path we walk every day. Sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is let go. What part of your story are you ready to release to make room for new growth?